Hey guys, welcome to the third lesson on the fundamentals of Java programming. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at loops. We're going to look at the three most basic types of loops, and I'm going to explain why we would want to use loops and why they are actually very useful. To start off, I want to talk about, obviously, what is a loop. At the most basic definition, a loop is simply a way to repeat a set of code over and over again, or repeat it a certain amount of times. And for example, let's say I had the word hello and I wanted to write it to the console 5, 10, maybe 15 times. Without learning loops, the only way you could do this from learning from the stuff that you learned in my previous videos is just to write system.out print line 10, 15 times with the word hello. But using loops, we can repeat an action numerous times, and that's where we're going to start off first, just making a simple program to repeat the word hello maybe 5 times. Now, there are three basic types of loops in Java. The first is the while loop. The second is the DoWhile loop. And the third is the for loop. We're going to go over all three of these loops and look at an example of each and talk about what are the differences and when you should use each loop. So we're going to first start off with the while loop. And the syntax of the while loop is just using the while keyword, and then we have parentheses, and then we create the block or the curly braces again, just like how the if statement syntax is. The while loop syntax, once again, is similar to the if statement syntax in that the what you put into the while loop in its parameter, or as an argument, is anything that evaluates to a true or false value. Because how the while loop works is the while loop will repeat its code as long as the expression inside in the parentheses is true. So they work the same way as an if statement, but the if statement just does it once. The while loop will do it as long as it's true. So let's say we'll start, the first thing I want to do is just create a while loop that prints something like 5 times. So, like I said, the syntax is while, and then you put the things that you want inside of here. So, like, while 5 is greater than 5. This is false, so it's never going to run. But this is the general syntax of what you want. So, we want to print out something to the console 5 times. So, system.out.println hello world. So now we just need to figure out what we're going to do with this. So logically, if I just did while true, this will go on forever and never terminate, because while true is saying true is never going to change. I'm passing in true inside of here, meaning this is an infinite loop. It will never terminate because true, it will always be true, and a loop goes on for as long as it's true. So if I run this program, we see hello world forever being displayed. Now, we need to create some kind of method that will make a loop go for a certain amount of time and then stop. Because as you can see, if I just do true, it lasts forever. So we need to put some kind of expression inside of these parentheses that will eventually terminate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called counter. I'm going to set it equal to 0. So we're starting at 0. And I'm going to say inside this parentheses, I'm going to say while the counter is less than 5. I'm creating a counter control variable. This variable is its job is just to control the while loop, to see how long the while loop should go. So as long as counter is less than 5, then the while loop will go on. So every single time the while loop executes its code, it's called an iteration. So every iteration of the loop, I'm going to say counter plus equal 1, or we could also say counter plus whatever 1, or counter equals counter plus 1. So I just want to increment counter by 1. So I'll use counter plus. That just makes it go up by 1. So when I say counter plus, every single time the loop iterates, or every iteration, it makes counter go up by 1. And what the by doing this, eventually the loop will terminate because every single time, so it will be like, okay, start the program, counter equals 0, print hello world, okay, counter go up by 1. Is 1 less than 5? Yes, okay, do it again. Is 2 less than 5? Okay, do it again. Is 3 less than 5? 4 less than 5? Oh wait, now is 5 less than 5? No, it's not. The loop terminates. So that's how we're going to get the 5 displays of hello world. So if I run this program, we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It says hello world 5 times because every single time it increments counter by 1, but it's only going to do it until counter is less than 5, while it's less than 5. So right when it counter hits 5, it stops the loop because it is over now. So this is one way that I can use a while loop to create a counter control. So if this behavior is so common of making a loop, only execute for 5 times or 10 times. Okay, sorry about that. I just had to pause the video. My dog started barking. I forgot what I was saying. I left off with just saying the while loop is, or this behavior of using a counter control variable to control how long a loop runs, maybe like 5 times, 6 times. That's so common that the for loop, which we'll also discuss, is basically this. The for loop is this basic behavior of doing something like a set amount of times, but it's in a more compact form to make it easier to do, so we don't have to create like an external variable like this and stuff like that, and have to deal with this counter plus plus inside the body of the loop. So when we look at the for loop, I'll show you how these are very similar. So where the while loop really shines is something that, not with counter control. Even though we can use counter control with the while loop, it really shines with just passing in some kind of Boolean value and having it do something forever until that's changed. For example, maybe if I'm making a graphical program that has a checkbox, like those little boxes you can click, and a check mark goes into it if it's clicked, and if it's not, then the check mark goes away. Has something like that, I can say while this is checked. So while it's checked, do something over and over, and when it's unchecked, then the while loop will stop, because you can just pass in the value of checked into the while loop. So that's where a while loop really shines, something like that. We can also do some stuff with the console that shows where it shines. So I'm going to do a program using the while loop to show you where the while loop can shine. So I want to make a program that basically allows the program to type in an amount, let's say 5, and then hit enter. Then he can either type in 0 or another number. If he types in another number like 10, it will add 5 and 10 together and keep track of it. If I type 0, it breaks out and gives you the total of all the numbers you add together. So by default, I can just type in 5, 10, 15, 20, 35, 40, whatever. Keep on hitting enter in between, and it will keep track of them, adding them together. And then when I'm finally ready to display the value to the user, I can type in 0, and it will terminate it. So that termination factor is what the while loop is really going to base itself off of. So the first thing I want to do is create my scanner. So scanner equals new scanner system.in. So with my scanner, I'm gonna ask the user to start off with entering a number in, I believe, system.out.print. Enter a number. We'll start with this. We'll edit it as we go. System.out, enter a number. I'm going to get that number and store it into a variable. Let's actually say, let's enter in amount. So now that I asked them that, now I'm going to store the amount into a variable. We're just going to use integers. So int amount equals s dot next int. So this is going to get whatever number is typed in and store it into the variable called amount. And then I'm also going to create a total variable, so that equals to 0. This variable is going to be used to keep track of the every single time we enter a number, it's going to add them together. That's what the total variable is for. So now that I have those two, what I want is the while loop. And if you remember, the while loop's job is to continue as long as we don't type in 0. We're going to keep on asking for a new amount. So I'm going to say while the amount is not equal to 0. So as long as the amount is not equal to 0, the loop will continue on and on. So if it's not equal to 0, I'm going to say total plus equal amount. So whatever amount is typed in, I'm going to add that to total because I'm keeping a running total. Then I'm going to say system.out.println, and I'm going to tell the user enter next amount or 0 to quit. So I'm going to ask them to enter a new amount or 0. And then when they enter the new amount, I'm going to say amount equals s dots next in. So we'll take that next value and update it to amount for the while loop when it comes back around. So if I read the flow of this program, how it works is, so we get the first amount entered, we create a variable called total that's going to keep track. While we don't type in 0, so any number besides 0, the while loop will continue. Every single time it's going to increment total by whatever is typed in, because we're keeping a running total of something. That's the point of the program. Then we'll print to the user enter the next amount or 0 to quit, because the 0 will make the while loop break out. And then I'm just saying amount equals the new value that's typed in. So whatever that they typed in again, that will be set into amount. So that when it comes back around for the while loop to run again, it's going to check to make sure the new amount that was entered is not 0. If the new amount's not 0, then it comes back in, and then now it adds the new value to the total variable. So now the total variable has the old value plus the new value. And it will keep on doing that until you type in 0 to terminate it. So at the end of the loop, when we eventually get out of the loop down here, that means now total is the total of all the values. So I'm going to print to the users the total. So I'll say the total is, and I'll just put in the total like that. And I'll just display the total to the user. So if you go ahead and run this program, you see enter an amount. I'll start with 5. Enter next amount or 0 to quit. 15, 5, 5, 6, 7, 3, 10, 100, 50, 475. So I entered all these numbers and I hit 0 now. Enter. The total is 281. So if you go back and add these all together, we should get 281, which it looks properly. We could do smaller numbers to make sure it's working properly. So I'll do 5 times. So if I type in 0, we see 25. So yeah, it is adding properly. So as you can see, this program is pretty cool. You guys should go ahead and try writing this yourself. I can enter in numbers infinitively. Well, I mean, I guess not technically until we run out of memory, but it'll eventually crash. But for the most part, we can type in lots of numbers, and it's keeping track. We wrote a program that's keeping track of all these numbers entered in. It's adding them on top of each other. So it keeps on adding them together. I can keep on typing. And then when I'm done, hit 0, and it gives me the amount of them all added together. 4,989 in this case. So this is a cool program that really demonstrates the power of the while loop. Where we're not really keeping track of how many times we're doing it. Like with the for loop, it basically, before the program starts, it knows how long the loop's going to execute, like we did in the first example with the hello world. We displayed it 5 times. We're not using that counter control variable here. Rather, it's all up to the user. We're giving the user the option to keep on adding together or hit 0 to quit and get the total. So we're giving the power to the user, and that's where the while loop shines. And with the DoWhile loop, I said there's 3 types of loops. The DoWhile loop is very similar to the while loop. But as you can see, the problem in this program is that I have 2 print statements for enter an amount, and I also have 2 next int statements. So we have duplication of code here, and the DoWhile loop is really the only difference is that the DoWhile loop is basically going to solve this problem where we won't have to duplicate this code. We can write it once. That's what the DoWhile loop will do. But don't worry about that. We'll get to that after the for loop, and we'll look at this example again. So, yeah. So this is the basics of the while loop. The while loop executes its code for as long as whatever is in its parentheses is true. That's all you got to remember about that. It will execute it for as long as it's true, and you could do a lot of things. You could be very creative. You could make counter control loops with this, or loops like that the user determines how long it lasts. So the next type of loop that I want to get into is the for loop. Now, like I said, the for loop is specifically designed for counter control situations, meaning I want it to execute 5 times, 10 times, 15 times. That is where the for loop shines. It basically combines all the components necessary that we had to do for the while loop. We had to create that variable outside the loop. We had to create the condition inside in the parentheses of the loop, and we need to make the incrementer inside the body of the loop. It takes those 3 components and puts them into one statement or one line, and that's what the for loop is for. It's just to shorten the while loop's counter control declaration. So the syntax for a for loop is for in parentheses. Now, inside these parentheses is where all 3 components will go. The counter control variable, so int counter, or whatever I want to call it. So int counter equals 0. That's the first part of the while loop that we did with the hello section. We first created a counter variable. The second part is the condition, while counter is less than 5. Now keep in mind, these are all separated by semicolons. These are not colons, they're semicolons. So while counter is less than 5, another semicolon. The last thing we need is the incrementer. So counter plus plus. So all 3 components are in the header of the for loop right there that we need. These are all 3 components that we needed to create on our own in the while loop if we want to do a counter control situation. We have the initialization of the counter control variable. We have the condition, and then we have every single time it executes, it goes up by 1. That's the counter plus plus right there. So now that's all set. All I have to do is system.out print line hello world, and now this will display it 5 times because that's what the for loop does. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this, and I'll do it really quick. Int count equals 0 while count is less than 5. So this and this are identical, except the 3 components, which is this component, and this component, are put into the for loop declaration header so that we can just write the code we need in the body. But the for loop is simply just a shorthand notation for doing this. The while loop is a very powerful loop. It's open to anything. Anything that evaluates to true can be used with the while loop. So in order to do this kind of situation of counter control, we have to be able to think and be creative and create it like this with all the separate components. But with the for loop, you need those 3 components to create the loop. So this is how you create a for loop. Now just remember, this is a shorthand for this while loop. But the while loop shines by doing other examples like we did with the amount keeper, where it keeps track of all the amounts added together. So let's just do a simple example with the for loop. So we can mess with that a little bit. What I want to do with this is I want to make a program that asks the user to type in 2 numbers, an upper bound and a lower bound. The upper bound and the lower bound will be used to add up all the numbers in between. Now, what I mean by that is, let's say the user entered in 5 and 10. 5 will be the lower bound, and 10 will be the upper bound. What I want to do is I want to add all the numbers in between that. So I want to do 5 plus 6, the answer of that, plus 7, the answer of that, plus 8, the answer of that, plus 9, the answer of that, plus 10. I want to add them all up together. So 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10. So we're going to write a program to do that with the for loop. So the first thing I need to do is obviously create my scanner. This is to get the input from the user. So my scanner is made. I want to say system.out print line enter in first number. And then I want to create my variable to hold the first number. So first number, or this could be lower bound. I'll call it lower bound equals s.nextInt. Then I want to do the same exact. I'm going to ask them again, except for the second number. So enter in second number, and this will be the upper bound, and it's equal to whatever is typed in once again. You've seen this. The reason why I'm going fast on this is because you've seen this in all the lessons so far. This is standard scanner and nextInt. So now that we have that, we're going to create the for loop. Actually, before that, we're going to create a counter control. A total variable, and this is going to keep track of all the numbers added together. So we need a variable to hold that. We need something set in memory to keep track of all the things added together. Now that we have that, our loop is going to be using our lower bound and upper bound. So we're going to say for int, I'm going to call it I. My variable is called I. That's just a standard for loops. Int I equals my lower bound. Now, it's my lower bound because I don't want to start at 0. I want to start at whatever the lower bound is because I want to add the lower bound to the upper bound. So I want to say while I is less than the upper bound. So I is lower bound while that is less than the upper bound, I plus plus. So what this is doing is if I typed in 5 and 10, I starts out as 5 because that's the first number entered in, and then it goes to as long as it's less than 10. I should probably do less than or equal to include 10 also. So that means if I typed in 5 and 10, I will go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Because I did I plus plus. Every single time it goes up by 1, starting at 5. So that's what the for loop is all about right there. So every single time it goes up by 1, I just want to take whatever I is, and add that to total. So I'm going to say total plus equal I. That means take I and add it to total. This is also, by the way, the same as saying total equals total plus I. These are equivalent statements. This is just a shorthand to remove the duplication of the total word, like I told you in the first lesson. So total plus equal I. So I'm adding whatever I is, and I will eventually be every single number between the upper bound and the lower bound, because it starts out at the lower bound, and it increases by 1 until it reaches the upper bound. So at one point, I will be every single digit in that range. So every single time it is that digit, we just add that to the total. So when the loop is done, at the end, the total will be all the numbers added up together. So I'll just print that out to the user, saying that this is your total. So your total is, and then I'm just going to plug in total using concatenation. So now I'm going to say enter first number 5, enter the second number 10. Your total is 45. So 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10 is giving me that 45. So I can do maybe 5 and 5,000, and I get this big number. So I could do some crazy math really fast using a for loop like this. So this is very powerful. I'm starting with my lower bound, going to my upper bound, adding it to my total every single time, and then just displaying the total. So this is an example of something that the for loop is good at doing. Like I said, like we did before, it's good at just displaying hello 5 times. Yeah, it's great at that, but it's also good at doing stuff like this. As you'll see in the next lesson, the next lesson is arrays. We'll look at how loops and arrays go really well together. I'll explain what an array is, but array loops go so well with arrays because we have this variable that keeps track of what iteration we're on, and that's really powerful for arrays. It allows us to work with arrays. So without loops, arrays would be pretty much useless. So that's the reason why I start with loops first, rather than arrays first. So we did the while loop and the for loop. So this is an example of using the for loop. That's what I want you to see, an example. So here's an example. So the last loop I want to do is the do while loop. And I want to undo, I'm going to go back to the where we had the while loop, because I want to show you how the difference between the while loop and the right here. The difference between the while and the do while loop. Like I said in the beginning, the while and the do while loop are almost identical. They basically do the same exact thing, except for one distinct difference. There's only one difference between the while and the do while loop. And I'm going to explain the difference, but I'm going to leave this code. I'm going to just bring it down there so you can't see it. So the syntax for the do while loop is simply do. I type in do, and I create my body. So whatever I want to do, so system.out.println hello. Whatever I want to do, that's syntax. And at the end of the do, I'm going to say while something. So while, I don't know. Let's say int count equals 0. Every time we increment, actually that's a bad example for this. We'll just say while true, just to make the error go away. So this is the general form of the do while loop. It's the do keyword, then whatever you want inside of here, and then the check, whatever you're checking for at the end of the loop. Now, if you are observing, you may be saying, okay, why are we checking at the end of the loop? And that is the major difference between the do while and the while. The do while loop is a post check. It checks the loop condition at the end of the loop iteration, whereas the while does it first. And what I mean by that is, no matter what happens, this loop will always execute at least one time, no matter what. Because there's no check in the beginning of the loop. The beginning of the loop is just do. It's just going to do the code first and then check at the end. So even if I did while false, let me cut this. Even if I did while false and I ran this program, we'll see that hello is still shown once. Even though if I did a while loop and did while false, it would not execute at all because the check is first. So the major difference is that the while loop has to do a check first, meaning that there is a possibility that the while loop will never execute at all. Whereas the do while loop always guarantees one iteration no matter what. As you can see, while false, it's still saying hello. The do while loop can guarantee one iteration no matter what. And that's the difference. That's the only difference between the do while and the while loop. Now, if I bring this while loop code back, I told you that the problem with this is that there's code duplication. I had to do enter an amount twice, and then I had to do s.nextInt twice. Now, the reason why I have to do that twice is because the where it asks the user to enter the amount is inside the while loop, and technically the while loop could possibly not execute at all. So if it does not execute the first time, we'll never see this output. So that's why I have to put these two questions, this question and this response, outside the loop the first time, because there's a possibility that the while loop will never execute. So I need to make sure it displays the user once this information, and then from then on it can do it inside of here. But technically, I don't need to do that. With a do while loop, I can replace this code and fix it. So let's just take this part. I'm just going to modify it so you can see what happens. And the body, I'm going to copy the body right over. And then the print line at the end, I want to put there. I'm going to delete the while loop. Okay, so now that I switched it over to a do while loop, I can remove some unnecessary things. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to take this. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to leave int amount just as the variable declaration. I'm then going to take this enter an amount, remove it, put it into the body of the loop. Actually, I'll just use this one. So basically, I'm just removing one of the messages. I'm going to take the amount, put it before the total, because that was erroring because it's saying, oh, amount has no value. So I create the total. Now let me remove these spaces. So now, as you can see, I only have one print line and one next int. I completely removed a whole print and a whole next int because this I can guarantee at least one execution, so I can put it all into the body. Inside the while loop, it's going to be while amount is not equal to 0. So if I run this program now, everything's going to work. Enter amount or 0 to quit. If I do 0, okay, we quit. The total is 0. Or I could do 5, all these numbers in, and then 0. And I get my total. So as you can see, the do while loop, I removed the necessity of having the two print lines and the two next ints. I removed that duplication of code, and now I only have one print line and one next int. And the only reason why I could do that is because, like I said, the do while loop guarantees at least one execution of its body. No matter what, it will be executed at least one time. One iteration is guaranteed, even if I did while false. Whereas the while loop can't guarantee that. There's a chance the while loop will never execute at all if the condition in the while loop is false. So it has to be true for at least one. So that's the difference between a do, while, and a while loop. So with that being said, we covered the three most basic types of loops, or the most commonly used loops in the Java programming language. We did the while loop, for loop, and the do while loop. So if you have an understanding of all three of these loops, that is great. It is okay if you're still a little fuzzy with them. Just try to practice them. Come up with some of your own exercises like the ones that we did here. They can be very simple like this. Like I said, the next video is on arrays. So we will be covering basically loops again, at least the for loop a lot in that. So if you're not too comfortable with the loops, you have another chance of seeing them in action, because the arrays depend heavily on loops to work. So with that being said, that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and be sure to stay tuned for the next video.